right, so my image is dry now, and I am going to just start coloring. Now these Copic markers have a brush tip to them, and they also have a chisel tip to them. And I typically color with the brush tip. The chisel tip is good to color with if you are, like if you have a really large background, then you can cover some more area with it. But I like the brush tip because it's got a nice flexible tip to it. You can get fairly fine, so you can get a nice little point in there. I'm gonna use my pale yellow for the windows. And I use nice and light strokes when I'm doing this. Now the nice thing with Copic markers is you can get some beautiful blending and shading with them, which is, and I just see that I added a little window in there. Sometimes that happens, especially with an image like this where you're not exactly clear where every single thing is, but that's okay. We turn that into a window and it will be just fine. It's one of those things, as long as you commit to it, it looks believable anyways. And there's so many times where I have a stamped image that I'm not exactly sure what some of it is, but you just make a decision and go with it. So I've got my windows there. So the nice thing with Copic markers is you can get some beautiful blending and shading with them. Now this particular image, the pieces are quite small, so there's not a lot of shading that we're going to end up doing, simply because there's not enough space to really even see it. But we'll do a little bit just to get a feel for it, just to get a bit of a touch to it. So did my light yellow for that part. I'm going to add a little bit of the brighter yellow just closest to the street lights here. And then I'm going to do this building in a brown, and I'm realizing that I have a light or a darker brown than what I used for my sample. And once again, I mean, you can be coloring these any color you want to color. You don't necessarily have to have them exactly the same as mine. I keep taking my lid off on the chisel tip and not the brush tip of my markers. There is a little mark on them just to tell you exactly which tip is which, but I never actually look at them ahead of time. So it makes it quite fun. So I'm gonna do a tiny little bit of shading here. So I'm gonna do a little bit of shading with this, and to do some basic shading with the Copic markers, you go in with the light first, then you go with the dark where you want the shading, and then you go back with the light. So I'm gonna do a little bit under the ruffles of her skirt here. And then let's do some greens. I'm doing the coloring quite quickly because I don't want this video to end up being super long. So I typically color fairly quickly anyways. I usually am fairly decisive. Let's do the wreath there. Where I want some dark parts, I'm going to just put a little tiny bit. And again, these images are so tiny that you're not going to see a lot of this detail, as well as the fact that the stamp has a lot of shading in it, so that does some of the shading for you. So you don't need to get too crazy with being precise with your darks and lights. Let's do some browns for a little wagon here. The nice thing with Copic markers is they're refillable. I just realized I used my dark color instead of my light color. That's why this is turning out so dark. The nice thing with the Copic markers is they are refillable. So you can either find a store that has a refill service, or you can buy refills and fill them yourself, and they're really quite simple to refill. And because of that, once the marker is dry, you're not going to throw it away, so it saves having unnecessary excess stuff in the landfill. little bit more responsible. It's nice to be able to refill a marker with ink rather than throwing it away once we are done with it. And an ink refill will fill the marker several times, so it's a lot more economical as well. Let's make this one brown here. Let's look at the back here. So you'll see the marker goes through the paper. That is absolutely normal, and that's how it should be. When you're doing lots of blending, you'll see it'll almost be like a reverse image on the back of your piece, and that's how you basically know you've done it right, is if you've got your marker going all the way through. That way you know you've used enough ink. The other thing to keep in mind while doing this, and for an image this tiny, you don't need to worry about quite as much. You want to make sure, if you're wanting to be precise with your coloring, and especially on an image where you're going to see where things have seeped through, you want to color just shy of your lines, because this particular ink, it does spread out a little bit on the cardstock. So we want to make sure to go a little bit shy of the lines. Let's do some of these grays here on the clothes. And then while the ink is drying, it will go all the way to the edge for you. And that's something that comes with practice as you get to know your markers. That will, I'm just going to do this gray just because I have it in my hand, and then add a little bit of this light aqua color here. I was trying to keep the colors as Christmassy as possible, but it kind of limits the palette a little bit. A little bit of green for this wreath. And I think that's all I'm going to leave it as. I will see you in the next video where we assemble our card.